Hello? There we are. Donovan just told me that they can't hear it yet. No, you're just getting it started, but Donovan just told me that they can't hear it yet. But okay, we'll go ahead and start real quick. We'll go ahead and pray and start. So, Lord, we are here as a church family to talk about this proposal that has come from the board. And Lord, I just ask that your presence would be here with us in a tangible way. We want to follow you where you're leading, and I trust that you work through your church. And so this is a good opportunity for us to have this time for you to work through each of us as individuals, but collectively as a church. And so guide us in the paths that are good for this church and for the organizations around it. Thank you, Lord, in your name. Amen. Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible because I know we don't have food and we're all going to get grumpy soon. So I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible, but I don't want to limit discussion or anything like that. Just trying to let you know we are trying to keep it brief. Basic background to the business meeting. In October, it was brought up in a board meeting about the idea of exiting being a constituent church of Buena Vista. The board decided, let's take the month of September or November and do due diligence. Let's go through, figure out the process, what it would look like. We talked with Craig Matson, the vice president of education at the conference, and that was Daryl Fields and I did that. Operating team met to discuss the financial implications of doing something like this, and so that's the kind of the background. We'll go into some of the reasons of why it was brought up on the back, but we'll get there in a second. So here's the basic idea of why we're having this business meeting now, and it might feel like we're doing it quite soon. Because if we're voting to leave the Buena Vista constituency, if it passes through this business meeting, it wouldn't go into effect until the 2020-21 school year, but we would need to let BV know by January 1st. So that's why we're having the meeting now. So that's the first part. The financial impact to parents. Many of you are parents in here. The basic conversation in board is that if we were to exit Buena Vista constituency, that the church would cover the difference between what is called, and we'll get to this on the back, but conference constituent and constituent. Constituent is a constituent church, what we are right now. Conference constituent is we're a member of the conference, and so we get a certain discount just based off of that. So we cover the difference between those two. And so you'd be getting the conference constituent rate if you're a parent, and we'd cover the difference so you wouldn't be paying more than you would now. So I wanted to put the negative effects just first so we can talk through that and understand the implications of all of this before we talk through why we're even talking about this. The first is, and Jeff, feel free to correct me on numbers here, but around 40% of Buena Vista's budget relies on 20% of church so if you need to cross that out and correct that, 20% of BV's budget relies on church constituency payments. And is there 11 constituent churches. Not all of them pay the full constituent rate. They're called adjusted constituents because they can't pay the full constituent rate. But there are 11 constituent churches of Buena Vista. We are one of them. If North Hill Adventist Fellowship exits, the amount that NHAF is responsible for will be divided on a percentage basis among the other churches. And you'll find out on the back we pay about $16,600 per year as a constituent church. So that $16,600, it's about $1,300 a month. That $1,300 a month would get divided up on a percentage basis between the other churches, meaning that the larger churches end up getting a larger share of that $1,300 a month. The smaller churches get a smaller share. Any questions about that specifically? So if other churches can't meet the increase in cost, it could negatively affect BV's budget in the long run. So that's the negative impact that it would have towards Buena Vista. So now let's go through the reasons of why this is even being considered to begin with. The first is financial, then we have geographic and relationship considerations. If we're just to go over the financial considerations, if you look at the first part is the tuition rates at Buena Vista. Now, these are preliminary numbers, ideas of what they will be for next year's budget. Buena Vista has not had the opportunity to go through and figure out the tuition rates for next year, but there will probably be an increase in tuition. So these are fairly good ideas of what it might be. So if you're a Buena Vista parent and you're seeing these numbers and you're like, I don't recognize those, that's because there might be a change for next year. So the two bolded numbers under tuition rates at Buena Vista are constituent, which is going to be about potentially around $4,100. The conference constituent rate for next year will be around $6,000. So if you go down to the financial outlook, if we're exiting, you'll see the difference between conference constituent and constituent is $1,900. $6,000 minus $4,900 minus $4,100 is $1,900. So that would be the amount that North Hill would cover for parents who have their kids attending, right? So on top of that, we'd do student aid, but that would be the base amount if you're sending your kid to Buena Vista, $1,900 to cover that difference. That means for right now, we have 4 students enrolled with a couple potential on the way, but we have 4 students enrolled currently. So if we took that number, 4 times $1,900 is about $7,600. So that's how much it would cost North Hill to cover the difference for the students currently enrolled. Now, let's keep that in mind. Total subsidy payments for the year for us as a church, we're paying about $1,383 per month in constituency payments. That comes out to about $16,601.28. That's our constituency payment for the year. Now, if we took our constituency payment for the year, that's $16,600, and we subtracted the amount of students enrolled, the coverage that we would put for that, we would save. This is the basic idea: is the church financially would save $9,000, $9,001.28. Does that make sense? And this is of course based on this current number. I know that Jeff, constituency payments are recalculated every year, right? And that's based on I don't know if did I write that in here? Oh, I didn't put that in here. Yeah, so it's calculated on a 2-year tithe, 2 past year tithe basis, and then there's a fun algorithm that Jeff gets to work through to figure out what the constituency payments are for each church. So this is numbers based off of this year, our constituency payment. So does that all make sense? I know that it sounds complicated, but pretty much when it comes down to it, the amount that North Hill would save per year is $9,000, $9,001 approximately. There's underneath that, you'll see each additional student enrolled at Buena Vista decreases our savings by $1,900. Each additional student enrolled at Northwest Christian School decreases this by either $1,057 or $1,095, depending on what grade they're in. So if we had 2 more students enroll in Northwest Christian, we would only be saving $7,000, if that makes sense, approximately. Tuition at Northwest Christian is $7,050 for K through 4 and $7,300 for 5 through 8. The reason it's not reflected here is simply because we're talking about leaving Buena Vista constituency. So the number that's reflected there would just be covering the same thing on that side, if that makes sense. Any other questions? Okay. That's the financial consideration. The geographic consideration is we are 4.5 miles from Northwest Christian, and we're about 12 miles away from Buena Vista. This has been kind of a thing that, like we've had a family or two go to Northwest Christian because we don't offer extra. They're getting the higher rate there, and so for ease of use for them, it was like we can go to Northwest Christian. We also have a couple of teachers that are teachers there, but also want to attend here or would like to attend here, and can't or can attend here, but feel really awkward and can't really do too much and can't be a member here because they can only be members at a constituent church of Northwest Christian. Now, we would not become a Northwest Christian constituent, but we could work through a closer relationship with them which is the relationship considerations following this. North Hill Adventist Fellowship we've never had a cooperative relationship with Northwest Christian other than financial aid for students who attend. So, if your student goes there, you can put in a request for a certain number per month for financial aid. Yes? Yes, and I'll get to that in a second so this is an opportunity for us to have a relationship with both schools. Other churches, there's 2 other churches in our conference who do this. There's Renton. They're approximately halfway between Kirkland Seventh-day Adventist School and Buena Vista. So they do what we've outlined, where they cover the difference in tuition. And then Tacoma Central does the same thing for Buena Vista and for Northwest Christian. So there's precedent to do what's being suggested, and with the potential of building a good relationship with both schools as opposed to just one. So that's kind of an overview. I'm happy to answer more questions there, but that's an overview of why it's even being considered. Sorry. One more thing is we've had, 2 more things. We've had a couple of parents who have chosen to send their kids to Buena Vista, even though it would be maybe easier to send them to Northwest Christian simply because of subsidy or because of the lower tuition rate at Buena Vista. And so that is something to consider. And then also, where our church is located is we are primarily a south and east church. If you look at a map of our members or people who attend regularly, here's North Hill, and most of our people are below and to the east, so up into Auburn and down. So we do have a significant number of, most of our kids go to Buena Vista because we've been attached to that school, but we do have a significant number of people that are south of the church who could send their kids to Northwest Christian, but it's a way higher tuition rate than Buena Vista because of the relationship. So that's one thing. The second thing to consider, and part of what kind of drew us into this too, is in our budget, we've experienced a decrease in giving over time. Some of this is due to retirement, people moving away, having a younger generation in church who doesn't have the kind of salary jobs or hasn't fully been educated in giving tithe. We've experienced at least some sort of kind of, we're not diving anymore, but it's from where it was, we've come down. And so that means that every month we have budgeted, we have to take around $750 out of our reserves and fund things in our budget. And so sustainability-wise, that's not really something that is very sustainable. Now, we can talk about that. I mean, a lot of that's educating people and giving and such, but that is our current situation. And so that is part of it too, is financially, but also relationally, wanting to establish a relationship with Northwest Christian and make it available for other people to attend. So I think that's an overview. So I want to open up for questions, feedback. Thoughts? Yes. Sorry, Matt. Yeah,
what is the adjusted constituent?
What is the adjusted? That's for a church that can't meet their constituency payment, and so the tuition rate goes up for parents. That's what's being proposed. Yeah. So we're not the adjusted constituent is not something that we've chosen to address. We haven't. This seemed to be the mm-hmm. Well, because we can meet it at this point, and we have enough savings that we can do that in the short term with the hope of upturning giving. But sustainability-wise, it's not the best thing ever. So, and then there was the last thing. There was the one last thing. If you look at our budget breakdown, 37% is mortgage, 35% is support. We had a big increase in taxes due to a voted thing in Edgewood, so property taxes went up. And there's a couple other things that caused increase there. And then 18% is education, meaning subsidy payment and student aid. And then 11% is our ministries, like ministry funding. And so when we look at that, we're really like over 70% of our budget is going to mortgage and support. That's crazy. And then another 18% of that is going to education, which is a ministry that many of us have been a direct result of. So this is not about let's pull away from something because we don't want to support it. At least in my heart, in my mind, in looking at this, it's not pulling away from an organization saying, we don't want to support you anymore, but more so, we want to support Adventist education. This might seem to be a good opportunity for us to support both schools, and we have financial considerations. So that's part of it, yeah.
So I think our church is a classic example that we're not a neighborhood church. And I think that's probably increasingly so of other Adventist churches too. And I think the idea of constituent churches is very outdated. And has the conference looked at? I mean, it just makes total sense to me that if you're a member of the conference, that ought to be just how constituency is determined. I mean, just whatever, the whole idea of a constituent side of things is weird. I mean, and it's just hard to understand. I know I'm getting old, and so just for nostalgia purposes, let you know that tuition is more than I paid for my first year medical school tuition.
Any other thoughts, questions?
So I had a question on, you were talking about teachers from Northwest Christian being able to attend. There's some kind of, I don't know, how exactly does that relationship work? There's some kind of strangeness with a church being a constituent church for a school, and then if teachers from a different school want to attend, that doesn't work because...
So that's not about we're a constituent of BV, so they can't attend here. It's that it is pretty standard policy that teachers are required to attend a constituent church of that school that they're attached to. Now, we'd be going out on a limb to say, hey, let's forge a relationship that allows, because we're much closer, so there's a higher chance of teachers or staff over there that would want to attend here. And if not, they only have one option of church. And that's a tough call for people. So to establish a relationship with Northwest Christian, that would be something where it's like, hey, we want to be more involved, but we also want to be a place where your teachers or staff could come if they wanted. And I mean, I don't suspect that we'll have a huge influx, but it does create, because they're both young adult couples, and at least one of them, they're just like they come here, they want to be here, but it's awkward because they still have to pay tithe over there and offering over there. And they still have to they feel attacked. There's kind of where have you guys been? Type of thing. So that's hard. That's hard for a couple. So that's part of it. Yeah. So, yes, Pam.
I feel like this is a fiscally responsible decision for us to be looking at. The fact that we have a deficit budget of about $750 a month gives us less than 4 years before we use up our reserves. We're looking ahead. I mean, we still have 6 months to go with this budget and with this payment to Buena Vista, but how can we sustain that without looking at this as an option?
Anyone else? Jeff, do you want to say anything? And you're on the board at Buena Vista. I can.
The whole idea of having constituent churches has basically been an important role in helping a lot of schools maintain over the years. There are, I mean, in the case of Puyallup, they're their own constituent. There's no other churches that support them, which is one of the reasons why their tuition is easily more expensive than Buena Vista, and they've always been either the first, second, or third most expensive school. BV has continually been at the bottom of the list compared to the other schools because we've got the support of, it's varied over the last several years from 10 to 12 different churches. If you took away all the constituent churches from Buena Vista, you could basically tack on about $1,000 right off the bat to every student's tuition, because there's 220 students. We get about $220,000 a year from the 11 churches. So basically, if you take that equation out, tuition, would automatically go up by $1,000. So with the support of the churches, the constituent churches, we have been able to keep the tuition rates relatively low. And my personal feeling is, and looking at big picture, not just Buena Vista, but there's 19 schools in our conference, and unless there is more than tuition money coming into the schools, I'd say within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start losing a number of schools because it's just the tuition keeps going up. Minimum wage impacts us constantly. The state has new rules that constantly come in. It gets more and more expensive to run these schools, and without constituent churches, the only people that are basically paying for it are the families. And I am a huge fan of the mission work of the churches, trying to get students in that maybe can't afford it. And I'm really afraid that, if without, and again, I'm looking big picture here, but without constituent churches, ultimately the Adventist school system is going to become a system for rich kids, because there's nobody else is going to be able to afford it.
I think there's a huge opportunity to discuss. If you actually look, and I'd really challenge each of you, if you haven't already done this, do a word search this afternoon, and you think it's going to be overwhelming. It's not. Put in tithing, and read every Bible text that there is for that. I think you have 70. And it's very clear that tithe was to support the Levites. Everybody else got land. The biblical model is that all Levites were supported by tithe money, which means all of the church budget really should be tithe-based. And if people understood that, I think tithes would go way up, and you wouldn't be having to play these, I don't want to call them shell games of how you move money around. It'd be very clear and transparent. Is that a Levite ministry? If it is, it's supported by tithe. And if it's supported by tithe, tuition doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive. And tithe is very clear. It's 10%, And so I'm just saying, I think it's time for us to look at the bigger picture as a church. We've done things traditionally, and we have very specific ways that we've defined. You can use tithe for this, or you can use tithe for that, and you can wash money a certain way to make it tithe appropriate or whatever. And for even my mind, I'm sorry, that's kind of ridiculous. And I think for your mind, it makes no sense. And so I think, again, if we go back to the model in Scripture is that God called the Levites to support the education and the spiritual teaching of the children of Israel. And that really is Adventist schools and the pastorate and the local church. And if we look at that as a bigger tithe and Levite ministry, I think that would be the way to look for the future.
Well, there is, and actually quite a bit of tithe goes to support, if I'm correct, goes to support teachers and funding all of that. So schools are, if I'm correct, Jeff, schools are funded by a couple of different things. There's the tuition, constituent churches, and tithe money from the conference, which does go towards, and then offerings and stuff. Conference pays 40% of the teacher's salary. And so that is a significant decrease to the school's cost, for sure.
This conference is one of only 2 or 3 conferences across the union that supports it at that level. Most of the other conferences, they're only paying between 20 and 30%.
So we support at the highest level. Yeah, our conference does compared to other conferences. Yeah, so our schools are funded by numerous things. So just a couple quick clarifications. And this is important, I think, to consider as we, if North Hill were to exit Buena Vista constituency. If I'm correct, Jeff, this would not impact Buena Vista initially first. It would impact churches first. But second, if churches can't make that payment, that would affect Buena Vista. And if more churches pull out, it could genuinely really affect. Am I hearing that correctly? Okay. So that's something to consider. I have a letter from the principal at Buena Vista that he asked that we read here. It said, "Good afternoon, North Hill Church. My name is Mark Griffin, and I am the principal of Buena Vista. I do not like to be someone who is confrontational. However, I do believe at times we need to speak the truth of what we believe God has placed on our hearts. Jonah is a prime example of this. Had he not shared his message, an entire city would have been lost. Here is a very brief and summarized thought that I'd like to share before you enter your meeting. What is it that God has called you at North Hill to do with the funds he has blessed each one of you with? Do you know? I'm not asking what you would like to see done with those funds, but what does God want done? Do what God is calling you to do. Do only that. And only after you have chosen to believe that he has given you insight through his word and his past leadership as to what he wants you to do. I have many quotes from Ellen White about the value of supporting Adventist education and the importance of the future of your children and those in your community, but I am guessing if you were looking for that counsel, you would have it already. In addition, there are many Bible verses about how God knows that in order to stay focused on him, we need to surround ourselves with a constant exposure to his law and his words. I'm guessing you already know of those verses or choose to find them if you desired. I would be happy to share stories of the evangelistic work that is happening 5 days a week at a school in the lives of students that are walking through those doors. No, not just your own students, but other students who have had the opportunity to witness. You have had the opportunity to witness to and for. This year alone, nearly all the 7th and 8th grade students at the conclusion of their retreat and this past fall recommitted their lives to Christ or committed for the very first time, most of which not only stood for that commitment, but stood in front of their peers sharing their personal testimony by their own choice. I had students come to me afterwards asking me for another opportunity because they didn't get a chance to share. How many of us adults have a testimony that we are willing to stand up right now and share? What is the testimony that you will have a year from now? A few years ago, I was part of a school that had a church that was struggling financially. They, like pretty much every other church I have been a part of, struggled to survive. Nothing was easy. They were one of 3 churches supporting our school, but by far the largest. Their commitment was $40K a year. It had been that way for years. That year, however, they decided to reduce it. They had remodeling and evangelistic program. They wanted to fund Pathfinders and to have the largest expense, our school, going out each month. They decided to knock it down from $40K to $20K. What they could do with $20K would be amazing. The repairs of the building, the programs for the elderly and lower divisions, and crusades would be given a surge of energy. However, the reality was that from that point forward, the commitment to the school was $20K, and the church was in the exact same place. It didn't have $20K extra for repairs, programs, or crusades. The church membership did not grow due to all the extra evangelizing. Money was still tight. The spot they were in was the same one, but the blessing to Adventist education was half. Maybe this story is unique and one of a kind. I don't know that I know for sure. What I do know is that when the widow poured out oil and flour and water for the bread for her son and Elijah and herself, there was no extra, but there was enough. If the little lad hadn't been given everything he had, his lunch, if the little lad hadn't given everything he had, meaning his lunch, what would the story have been? Would there have been a feeding of the 5,000? If Abraham chose to not have the faith to sacrifice a son, where would there have been a ram? My experience is that when I increase my giving or decrease my giving, the amount in my bank remains the same. Therefore, I give and give generously. I tell families, yes, tuition is a car payment for a nice car, and yes, I know you can't afford it, but God can and will if you do everything you can. So I ask, what is it that you know God is calling you to do? What is he asking you to spend money on? If you are not sure, you are not ready to decide. If you know, you need to get in with both feet. The Jordan River never parted until the priest had stepped in the water, not before, after. Are you ready to get your feet wet? Good education can be found almost anywhere, and education that writes the words of the law of God on the hearts and minds of our children from the time they get up until the time they lie down is not easy to find. If we don't provide Adventist Christian education to our children and our neighbors' children, we certainly haven't done all we can to introduce them to our Savior and offer them a chance to make a choice for him. We also have not followed the commands God has given us to talk about these things from the time they rise up to the time they go to bed. And that's his letter. Okay. Any other thoughts? Oh, yeah, Greg has a letter too. This is from Greg. Dear friends, the decisions that the church makes will make our priorities obvious. The church can find can choose to find ways to further support our children's education and the institutions that provide it. These children need the foundation that a Christian education alone can provide. This support and training are especially crucial in our society. Our children will become future leaders of our church, and they need to be equipped and strengthened to assume those responsibilities and to be able to stand true and firm in their relationship with Christ. This is an awesome responsibility, challenge, opportunity, and witness. The board has chosen to raise funds for cosmetic changes to our building. I suggest that funds also be raised for continued support of our educational institutions and their students. In the end, our children will be trained for heaven. What the church building will be fuel for the final fire. What are our priorities? Sincerely and respectfully, Greg Bronson. So, just again, a quick clarification. In doing this, and I totally see what Greg is saying too, it could be perceived we're pulling support, and it may well be. I don't know. But at the same time, what we are choosing to do, if we go down this path, is to support 2 institutions as opposed to 1, and to make sure that our kids, I think the whole entire board is totally committed to making sure that Christian education is a huge thing that we support, that we continuously are making sure our kids are in Christian education and such. So it's not oh shoot, we don't like Christian education, but this is kind of the proposal that's been made. Financial considerations, relationship considerations with Northwest Christian and such. So, yes.
About faculty who would like to be able to attend North Hill, I thought they had to attend a constituent church.
But he can't attend a church that's a constituent of another school, I think is the issue.
Sorry, I can answer that again. If that was the end of your question. Yeah, they would need to, that's general policy. However, the goal would be to form a relationship with Northwest Christian where that was a thing. Because we'd be helping them in a way that other churches don't. They have pretty much Graham, and that's it. And Graham, all of their kids grew up and left. So Graham isn't involved anymore. So we'd be, in essence, supporting them as a partnership, but it's not a constituent church. So the hope would be that we can work through something where we can have a more closer tie to them as well. So, yeah.
But you really wouldn't be helping them any more than you would be helping BV. I mean, all you're doing is making an extra tuition payment to parents. I mean, there's no additional support.
That's true, but we don't do it yet. You're totally right, Jeff. It's not like we're putting a ton of money into them, but yeah, we don't subsidize payments there yet because we can't. So that would be something we could do. Yes.
I think I'm not going to be as eloquent as everybody else, but as a parent who has a child there, I feel, and as a member here, I feel really torn. I feel like I'm having to choose which parent to live with. And I know that BV, maybe not initially, is going to take a hit. And how is that? I mean, it's selfish to say, how is that going to affect me and my life? But it will. I mean, I see so much of how BV has helped my child, but also how North Hill has helped my child. And if we're increasing tuition rates, and if North Hill is going to increase their payment per child based on tuition rates, and it just keeps getting higher and higher and higher, then really, what's the big, discussion? And I just.
Well, see, the thing is, we can always go back into. That's a good point. We can always go back into being a constituent church that's always an option. So, if we need to, we could. So this is not a final. I guess my point is this would not be a final say oh, we're leaving forever. But that is a factor. What you're saying about rising tuition rates, just to clarify, I don't think you're saying this, but just to clarify, the tuition hikes that are coming are not a result of any of this. Though you are correct that if it continued, or if churches weren't able to help, or if it went farther down the road, it could result in more. So yeah, that is true. Yes. You're fine.
Okay, another confusion. If we're currently paying $16,601, and if we change and are no longer a constituency church, then we're still taking $750 out of our budget per month. How much are we taking out of our budget, our savings per month at 16,601? I mean, we're going in the hole even faster. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's the $700.
Yeah, so we are currently, with our constituency payment, taking $750 out of our reserves to cover everything. It's not just the constituency payment. If we didn't have a constituency payment, we had these other ones, that would severely decrease the deficit, as well as over the course of the year, we'd have more money to fund ministry and keep out of a deficit, rebuild reserves. Now, Mark makes a good point, the principle that we could pull stuff and everything stays the same, we're just not supporting the school. Absolutely, that's a total possibility. And so, we can look at it that way. Also, I mean, there's the possibility that with the extra the financial base that we have, that we don't, in 4 years run out of reserves. So there's a couple things to consider. I see his point fully, and I get it. And I've seen churches do this before, and they stay the same. So there's always that risk, for sure.
Since we're building a philosophy change potentially of how we are supporting Christian education, I would like to also add that we have availability to families that feel called to homeschool. If they need financial support for that the church be willing to support that as well.
We can definitely talk about that with the board. That'd be interesting to consider. I know we have at least one family that does. Yeah, oh yeah, and you are too, yeah. I forgot because we've talked about teachers and stuff, but that's a co-op, so yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. So the last thing that I'll say before we go into it is we can look at it a couple of different ways. First is, that we're pulling support from Buena Vista. Again, the intention is not to pull support from Buena Vista, but to be a church that can support two schools. And there's one more thing I had, and I've forgotten it now. But that's the basic idea. And that's not to say, none of this is a guarantee. Absolutely. I just want to be completely upfront with this. None of this is a guarantee. We don't have a guarantee that we're going to have students at Northwest Christian. We don't have a guarantee that we as a church will, we don't have a guarantee that we will have an increase. We could decrease even farther. That would be rough. But I don't believe that we will. But there's no guarantees here. I just want to, there's no man, if we do this, then we're going to thrive. There's none of that. We're trying to make the best decision that we can as of right now. And it's not a dying decision oh no, we're running out of money. So, but what Pam said, a fiscally responsible decision is probably the best way we could try and put the reasoning behind it alongside being a church that supports two schools. So we're not withdrawing support from Christian education. It's being a church that can support Christian education in a way that's viable for our church. So those would be my last words. I don't know if there's any other. Yes, Jeff.
One thought, and this applies to not only our church, but I think across the Washington Conference and other conferences. And what Ken said before is very true. The more tithe we have, the more funds there would be to operate any number of things, from churches, schools, evangelism, more pastors, whatever. A couple of years ago, I checked with Jerry Russell, who's the treasurer of the conference, and Pam, you can double check me on this, but I think right now the number that last I heard was only between 45 and 50% of conference members give tithe, pay tithe. Well, I don't. That's the number that Jerry gives me. Yeah. So, so again, there's, across the conference, tithe, we maybe have 50% of the people pay tithe. And, I guess, and I don't know what the operating board or the church board has done here, but I mean, one of the issues that we're talking about here is by cutting the subsidy, we're cutting our expenses. And well, have we looked at increasing revenue? I mean, have we looked at trying to get more people giving tithe? Have we looked at trying to give more people giving to local church budget? Because again, I mean, if we can cut expenses, but if people continue to not give, sooner or later you're going to run out of expenses to cut. So I mean, it's just like this is the decision that's looking at expenses. We probably should be looking at things to increase revenue as well.
I can address that real quick. We've done offering education. We've been trying to do that like every other month. We do 3 or 4 weeks where we're every offering time I'm talking through what we have. I don't know if you've seen that, but that's part of it. And I've had several new people come up and ask me about giving, and so we talk about combined budget and tithe and all those different things. So there are at least starting to that. That doesn't have to be the full extent of it, but we have at least started in that direction of like, let's try and make sure that we're educating people and challenging people to give. So you have let's see here. You should have a sticky note. What we're going to do, unless there's more discussion, we're going to just take the time to I guess let me ask that first. Is there more discussion? Anything else that anybody wants to say? Okay, so again, just to say this, we'll have you vote. You can put it in here. And can I get 1 or 2 people? Lauren, would you be able to count with one other person? And so we'll have a count after this. And then we'll open it up. I'll send an email after this to everybody, kind of going over, emailing this out, and saying if anyone wants to watch, voting will be open for probably till Monday. So other people can have a say if they want to. So we won't have a final tally until, yes? I propose that if you're going to do that way, you can add it after, but not announce. We won't announce until, absolutely. So we'll get the votes from here, and then if anyone else who wasn't here watches through that and wants to vote, then they can vote as well. We'll keep that open for a couple of days just so people have a say. And so that's the basic idea. So if you want to vote, the proposal is that North Hill Adventist Fellowship exits being a constituent church of Buena Vista. That ends there. There is, of course, more that we've talked about increasing relationship with Northwest Christian, other stuff like that. But the crux of the decision that this meeting would have to make is whether we're exiting Buena Vista constituency or not. The rest of that is part of it, but not part of the decision we have to make today. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the proposal that has been sent forward from the board. And so if you want to vote yes, just write yes. If you want to vote no, write no. And then if you just want to put it in this basket and bring your pen up too, after you're done, you might need to share a pen with someone next to you. But after you're done, just come and put it up here. You can fold it, put it in there, and we'll have it counted.